Hello and welcome to Grieving Voices. Today, my guest is Erin Whalen. She is the founder of Compassionate Coaching, whose mission is to restore dignity to the grieving and dying and to help them feel seen and heard by filling the cups of and providing communication skills to those who serve them. Before founding Compassionate Coaching in the fall of 2020, Erin spent 14 years as a professional actress and role player, particularly in medical education. She uses that background as an actor, trainer, facilitator, and playback theater practitioner to develop highly interactive, cathartic, and memorable programming that centers around giving and receiving empathy for professionals in the end of life and bereavement field. Erin uses her own experience with grief, particularly her sister Gina's death in 2016, and her lifelong relationship with anticipatory grief to infuse her work with empathy and compassion. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your personal grief story in particular here on my podcast today.
Thank you for having me, Victoria. I'm really happy to be here.
And I think this is a very interesting niche. As someone, I'm a trained end of life doula, and I even know in my energy healing work, um, the organization through which I trained with biofield tuning in particular, they're now talking more about facilitating training to help people have really just teaching people, practitioners, how to communicate with their clients. And even when I went through my end of life doula training, that really wasn't a heavy emphasis either, because I think it's almost like this given, or people think it's this given natural gift, that empathy is a natural gift, right? I think it
Mhm.
is. Some people haven't, and really some people where it comes easily, right? And other
Right.
people can really struggle with putting themselves in other people's shoes and empathizing and relating in that way. Um, and so I think you've found a niche for yourself that's probably very needed because that doesn't come natural for a lot of people.
Right. It didn't come naturally for me. It was something I had to learn. And I think that actually going back to my sister Gina, at her wake, I had a cousin come up to me and she said, this is gonna sound funny. She said, but I really think that having Gina as your sister, Gina was really severely disabled. She had cerebral palsy. And she said, I think having Gina as your sister really helped make you, who you are. And in my mind, I'm like, nah, I'm just naturally like warm and gifted. And like, I'm just a good human like that. And then I'm like, no, no, no. Like, that is absolutely true. Like, when you are in a household where, you see death imminent and illness as your daily bread, you can't help but I mean, you could become bitter and, I definitely am working my own bitterness and things, but like, hopefully that enables you to become a more compassionate human. Um, but even if you have that compassion kind of naturally, like these are skills. It's communication skills. It's not something that you're either born with or not. As you said, like some people are more naturally gifted in it, just like some people are more naturally gifted in music. But you know, unless you're a prodigy, you actually have to learn. Like you actually have to learn things, and even prodigies, I'm sure, learn things. So you have to practice the skills. You have to learn the notes and the scales and in communication skills. You have to learn things like empathy. You have to learn things like how to be aware of your own cadence and your own nonverbal communication, and how do you learn about other people's nonverbal communication. Those are skills you have to learn.
Yeah, even if comes natural, I agree with that too. Yeah.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
then the flip side of that is the compassionate fatigue that
Yeah,
can often happen when you're either exposed to that on an ongoing basis, as helpers or healers often are, or even just caregivers.
absolutely. I mean, I've often said I'm there to serve the people who are at the bedside because I know being at the bedside, maybe that will change in some, season of my life, but at this point, I look at that and I say, "That's not what I'm called to." So, you as a death doula, I tip my hat to you and I say, "You're doing work that most people on the planet can't envision themselves doing, and so we know that we need you, and so I'm here to serve you all. I'm here to say, I can help you with these things so that you can continue doing the work that you love, so that you can continue doing the work that you love and have it not exhaust you as much as it might if you didn't have these skills."
I want to circle back to that, so let's put a pin in that.
And
Yes,
okay,
because I think it's important for whether you're a caregiver or whether you work in this industry or not. I think you have a lot to share on that. But first, let's rewind the clock and
okay.
to what brought you to this work, and that you mentioned it briefly, but your sister Gina, who had cerebral palsy, cerebral.
Mhm.
I always say that wrong. I
I
think
know. I growing up, we always heard cerebral palsy,
yeah,
but then, like, I started, once YouTube and things are around, then it's cerebral palsy, and I'm
cerebral.
like,
Yeah.
I don't even know. I don't even she had CP. She had CP. So,
Was she older or younger than you?
older,
Okay.
older. Yeah, so that's part of it too, is that now I'm reaching ages that Gina never reached. So that's the season I'm in, is that I'm 48 and I just turned 48 like 2 weeks ago. And well, just over 2 weeks ago, because Gina died in 2016. She was 45 and it was 2 weeks after I turned 40. So it was, now I'm 46, was a really odd year for me because I was like, this is weird to be the age my older sister never reached. But 47 and 48, I'm like, yeah, I'm I'm here. I'm ready for it.
I just talked about this with the last guest I recorded with, whose episode won't go live until 2025, just like yours. But we had talked about that and how it's the dates that people really don't talk about. Um, the ages, the milestones that we grow up with sometimes. I mean, considering I was very young when my father passed away, so he was 44 when he passed away. So for me to, that was one of the things too, like, okay, I'm going to be the age that my father passed away soon. Just what does that mean for me? And I can relate to that. And I think many people listening to this can relate to that. And so, how have you navigated those milestones and how have you honored your sister's life when those have come around?
Well, I remember when I was getting ready to turn 46, and I was at a job, and it was a really cool job where I go offsite to a resort and I get to work with physicians who are improving their communication skills. So I'm like this early morning walk on this like golf course, and it's sunrise, and I'm just like loving life. But I'm also very tender with my heart because I was getting ready in just a few days to turn 46, which was the age that Gina never reached. And as I was walking, I was talking with Gina, which I never heard the term continuing bonds until recently-ish. And I'm like, oh, they're real. Like those continuing bonds are so real. So I talk to Gina all the time. And I was talking to her as I was walking. And I had been listening to a song also that really like unlocks my heart. And it's called Forgiven by Deb Talon. And it's just this beautiful song. And I'm talking to Gina, I'm listening to the music, and I say to her, and I say, Gina, when you were 45, you died. And I sensed that she said back to me, and when you were 46, you lived. And literally, like within seconds of having that conversation with Gina, I look up and there is this blue heron, like very close to me, and he just lifts up and takes flight. And it was one of those moments that you're like, this was deep. Like, I'm going to remember this. Actually, am in the process of finishing up my book, and it's in the books. It's like one of those moments where you're just like, this is something. And, it's interesting because that was right before I turned 46. And I'm glad I had that conversation with Gina. And I'm glad she said you lived because it really was a hard year. It really was a difficult year. And so now that I'm past it and I'm a couple years past that age, I can look back and say, you're right, Gina. Like it was a hard year, but I lived. Like I'm still here. I'm still here. I'm still trying to make this world a better place. Um, and so that was really memorable. So I think, communicating with her, to get back to your actual question, Victoria, communicating with her has helped me. Honoring certain dates. For me, it's her birthday and then the date that she died, which is November 30th. Like those are dates that I honor her and remember her in a specific, but it is every year what that honoring looks like. Cause I'm a firm believer in like, do what makes sense for you this time. And you don't have to do anything big or like if you do something small, it doesn't mean you loved them less. Right? Like it can be really small and it doesn't have to be anything. Um, so finding little ways to, well, usually we as a family eat ice cream sandwiches on her birthday and then the day that she died because she loved ice cream sandwiches. And that's about it. Like that's really all I do these days when those dates come around because that works for me. And I know that it doesn't mean I love her less if I'm not doing something big. The first birthday after Gina died, the first time her birthday rolled around, I ran a 5K and I'm not a runner, but I was like, I'm going to do this for Gina. And because Gina was wheelchair bound, she never walked. And so for me, it was like, I am going to use all of the things, and opportunities that Gina never had. And now I'm really content just having an ice cream sandwich.
And I love how you shared how that can change over time. And I think as we evolve with our grief, it's normal and it's natural for that to change over time, like you said.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the last thing we want to do is pressure grievers to like
Mhm.
do something. Like you don't have to do anything. It's okay.
And like you said, I mean, I know people have very different, people have different varying beliefs, but
Mhm.
those continuing bonds, like I think so many people really don't acknowledge or accept, or they think it's woo woo or whatever to communicate with those who have passed.
Mm.
Um, that certainly wasn't something that was taught to me, that that was okay, even as a child. Like that would have been an amazing healing tool, I think, for me as a child, to
Oh,
someone to
gosh.
give me that permission, right? Or to
Mhm.
um, give me that understanding that that's possible, right? And I think as grievers, it's so important to have something to believe in.
Mhm.
I do. Um, and if that can give you hope
Mhm.
in your healing, then by all means, it's worth doing. And that's a
Yes.
small thing that you can do on a daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed.
One of the things that and you don't have to answer if you don't want to, is my own curiosity. Um, your sister is older than you, and I can imagine that parents who have a child with special needs question, should I have more kids? Um, Given when someone has something that would require a lot more care and things like that. Um, have you personally ever felt like, or growing up, um, felt the weight of that,
Mm.
of being another child in the home to be cared for? Like, did that influence your independence, do you think?
I think so. I was a pretty quiet kid. I internalized a lot. And so I think for me, it was assessing the situation without realizing I was doing it and realizing, okay, like clearly someone here has great needs and much greater than I will ever have. And so it'd probably be best for me to just, not make trouble, right? So that was kind of my role, if you will. I was kind of a really good kid. I mean, I'm sure. I mean, there were many times I was not a good kid, but for the most part, I was good in school, and I didn't get into trouble at school, or I was pretty easy in that way. And so I think I internalized it. I don't think I ever logically like came to that conclusion. I think I just kind of slipped into that. And maybe some of it has to do with my temperament. I'm very introverted. I do believe that that is something that's, from birth, and like whether Gina had CP or not, I'm sure I would have been an introvert, right? And so maybe that was part of it too. But yeah, I think I just kind of realized that, well, someone really needs a lot of care, and school came easy for me. Like I just kind of did what I needed to do to be a good kid, and I was happy. Like I had friends, I had what I needed, and um but I do think there was this kind of subconscious feeling of like I don't want to I don't want to be causing more need in the house. There's already such profound need.
Was it just you and your sister?
No, I'm the youngest of four.
Okay.
So I have a living older sister and a living older brother.
And they're both older than Gina?
Gina is the second.
Okay.
So my brother and I are both younger than Gina.
They just say there's an importance in the birth order, right? And I think that plays a role definitely in a situation like this where there's a child with special needs
Yeah.
and requiring special care and things like that. Um,
Yeah.
was there ever a time, do you feel like, where you had this awareness about that, where, oh gosh, I do have needs and they haven't been met in a really long time, or it's time that I meet my own needs, or things like that? Like, I'm just talking about needs, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we can have our basic needs met. I'm
Yeah.
talking maybe emotional or connection wise, um, especially if you internalize a lot of that, right? And
Yeah.
you don't want to necessarily communicate that openly. How did that translate, I guess, that awareness about that into your teen and adult years?
It's something I didn't really think about until much later. Um, I think for me, it's more about recognizing, like grieving what could have been, if that makes sense. And I know was on your website, and I know that you're an advocate for like grief is more than, the death of a loved one, right? Grief is bigger than that. There are all sorts of things and circumstances that we grieve. And so, one thing, for instance, that I grieved recently was, well, I didn't have a typical sisterly relationship with Gina. Like, I didn't have that. And my older sister was 6 years older, which doesn't sound like a lot, but like oldest versus youngest, it was just like there was a big gap there. Um, and so Gina was, the closest sister to me age wise. And I really recently grieved that loss of what could have been. What would it have been like to have had quote unquote normal sisterly relationship with her? And um that has been more on my mind lately of like, what would that have been like? Would that have, would we have gotten along? Would we have fought? Would we have, I have no idea. Would we have shared secrets? Would we have, talked about boys? Would we, I don't know. I don't know.
Mm. What do you think has been the greatest impact for you with this grief and this loss in particular?
I think for me, I had not heard the word anticipatory grief until a friend mentioned it to me like maybe a year and a half ago. So I lived it for 40 years and I never had language for it. And so I think the gift is one of the gifts. There are so many, but one of them is like now I can say, oh my gosh. And I like talk about anticipatory grief all the time now. I can't stop talking about it because I finally have language for this fear of someone dying, fear of anyone dying. Still have that. Like I'm always afraid my husband is going to die, like every day. Every day I'm like planning his funeral. It's ridiculous. Um, this feeling of dread, this every time I would say goodbye to Gina it was like, oh my gosh, is this the last time? Like all of these experiences in this like just cloud that was just my normal. It was just my absolute normal. It was the family I was born into. By the time I was born, Gina had been diagnosed. She was clearly not reaching milestones that I would soon reach. Um, and so for me, there are so many people out there. If I didn't have language for it and I lived it for 40 years, there are so many people who are probably asking if there's something wrong with them, if they're going crazy. And I can tell them no, like there's nothing wrong with you. You're not going crazy. Yes, it's okay to feel relief when someone dies after a very long illness. Yes, it's okay if you don't cry a lot after they die. Like that was my experience. I spent a long time thinking I was broken because my grief after Gina died was so seemingly minuscule. And so now the gift is I can tell people, like, wait, there's this thing that you probably don't know about, and you might be experiencing it, and you're not broken.
I'm of the belief, and I've shared this a lot in previous episodes and things. I think the language or the word can be helpful in understanding, but to me, grief is grief.
Mm,
And grief is normal and natural in whatever shape or form it takes. And um, I'm curious, where did my question go? Whoop, out of my head. Um, was Here it is, just came to me. Was
it
grief,
happens.
yeah, because we were talking about the language.
Mm,
And ironically, you teach communication in the genre
right.
of end of life. So I'm curious if growing up, if grief was openly talked about and Gina's imminent death and all of those things.
It was not. It was not.
Mm. Do you think that's kind of where this mission was born in some respects?
I mean, possibly, possibly. I mean, my parents did the best they could, right? I mean, I can't imagine four kids in 6 years, one of them severely disabled. Um, I can't imagine. And so, there's no blame or regret there. There's none of that. There's not a sense of righteousness of like, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to go out there and tell people what I didn't know. I'm a firm believer that people really do the best that they can at the time. Um, and so it was born of a time when I was like journaling and like as far as my company goes and where I wanted to take it. I was praying and journaling. And as I was journaling and I was kind of pinpointing different moments in my life or different jobs that really felt like the right kind of fit, different volunteer opportunities, just different things from my life. And when I looked at the ones that were most resonant, they really had to do a lot with like grief and death. And so that's where the goal of working with end of life workers, grief workers came from. And then I recently expanded it to do more to grievers, and to continue to work with people who are in the profession, but to grievers themselves and to teams who may be trying to process loss or trying to process grief. Um, there's some big movements to really look at how we handle grief in the workplace. Um, and so kind of broadening that scope, but it really did have its root in that prayer time, journaling time, and looking at the things in my life and the moments and the relationships. And of course, Gina was in there. Um, and it just felt, I don't think I was I think the pieces like the puzzle's there, but the pieces go in slowly. And I'm sure there are other revelations I'll have later, but at the time I wouldn't have been able to say like, oh, clearly this is in response to the situation of growing up with a severely disabled sister. Um, but now, of course, it is like like I'm looking at like as the puzzle gets more and more complete, you're like, oh, of course that's a cat. Like it
Mhm.
didn't look like a cat until 3 minutes ago, but like that, of course, that's a cat. So like, of course, it's all connected to Gina and the communication skills. I had a friend point out to me recently, which I had not made the connection. That's the other thing is that like when it's your own puzzle, it's like a puzzle of your own life. Like you really need help like seeing the pieces because you're like, I mean, it just all looks like clouds to me. Like I don't know what I'm looking at. But someone else can come in and be like, okay, can't you see over here? Like this cloud looks like a cat and this one looks like a frog. And it's like, oh, I had no idea. But I had a friend say to me, or help me realize that because Gina was essentially nonverbal, we had to be able to interpret her noises, the sounds she would make. And I had not pieced that together that like I was getting a PhD in nonverbal communication and I had no idea. All those years, I had no idea. And I didn't realize it until very recently. A friend pointed that out to me and I'm like, duh, you're right. And so this concept of communication skills is really strikingly because of Gina, although I never, which is, it seems ironic. It's like my nonverbal sister is a huge reason why I'm in communication skills work today. But it makes all the sense in the world.
Well, and I think one of the lessons that one would get out of that is learning how to be present and attuned to the cues from someone else and the environment to become more sensitive to those things. And I think nature is constantly giving us cues and nonverbal communication, right? You have a dog. My dog looks at me and I can tell he needs to go
Right.
outside. He doesn't have to bark or he doesn't have to growl or he doesn't have to do anything. He just gives me this look. It's like this ESP, that you
Yeah.
develop this connection. It's the connection that you intentionally put effort to that helps you draw those conclusions. Oh, this is what you need. This is what you meant. It's no different than infants or children. They can
Yes.
cry, right? They cry. That's the only thing they have is to cry when they need something. That's how they communicate. Well, what if they can't cry? What if they're, you know, um, nonverbal, right?
Mhm.
They adapt. They adapt. I think we naturally adapt when something about us isn't functioning optimally. We adapt.
Yes.
Um, and so I really think it has helped you become hyper focused on nonverbal cues of other people and body language and all of that. I grew up in an environment of chaos, and so me, it was always anticipating the next. So tone of voice, and
Mm.
I mean that's huge for me. Tone of voice, and it's not what you say; it's how you say it. Feeling the energy of someone's physical body, seeing that, like almost have an x-ray vision. I can tell what they're thinking just based on their body language. So that is, I'm highly attuned to that. I think these are skills that we are born, that we not born into, but well, we're born into our families, correct? But the environment in which we are in is so um, paramount in influencing to who we become. And I think we underestimate that.
Yeah.
And we don't connect the dots either for
No.
ourselves. It's like you were describing, it's like you can't see one of my friends says it all the time. You can't see the label from inside the jar. It's totally true.
Mhm.
This is where grief support is imperative because it's really difficult to often connect those dots for ourselves.
Exactly. That's exactly it. Yeah, and kudos to you for recognizing that, like based on your family upbringing and dynamic. And so that's made you hyper aware of people's energy and tone of voice and things like that. And so, and you have this steady, smooth, like soothing tone of voice. And so,
That's what people tell me all the time.
yeah, it's just so calming. And so I'm sure that the grievers you support and everyone who listens to your podcast appreciate that very soothing tone.
Yeah, it's something too that like I started creating meditations because I kept hearing that. So it's like, again, like our environment, the people that are in our lives, we're constantly getting cues and information. And I think becoming attuned to that is really how you develop your intuition and listening to those messages that we receive. Would you have considered yourself an intuitive child?
Think looking back, I can say yes, but I don't know if at the time I was like aware of it. There was one really interesting situation in high school that I was like, oh, that was weird. Like that was something that, and I'm a Christian. Like I have a very strong belief in an afterlife and connection with those who have died. And there was one very interesting experience that I was like, not everyone had that experience. Like that was weird. Um, So besides that one moment, I don't think I would have recognized myself at the time as intuitive, but looking back, I say absolutely I was.
I've had moments like that. I describe it like drop in the mail slot. It's like this, you receive this
Dropping.
information and yeah,
Yeah.
it's like a drop in the mail slot. Um and that's the intuitive connection that we all have. I feel like we all have the capability. We just dismiss it, stuff it down, aren't have too much emotional, energetic baggage that we're holding on to. We can't plug in, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's really a lot about the work that I do. And I feel like what you do is so helpful in people I think in the process of probably working with you, developing that connection for themselves, because in learning how to be an open flow of communication with another person, you're going to start receiving these intuitive knowings or these hits or these information in your mail slot, like what to say next, how to say it, what do they need to hear. Um, and again, that doesn't come natural. And so thank you so much for the work that you're doing. I think it's amazing. I think it's nichey and I love it. And um, yeah, very much needed.
Thank you. Thank you for the work you do. Because, like I said, most of the world looks at people who work in hospice or as end of life doulas and say, like, nah, like, that's not for me. And so we need you. Like, we need all the people who feel that calling to live that calling out because it's a beautiful calling and most of the world is not called to it.
Well, and my confession is that I haven't been doing that work yet because I haven't figured out what that looks like for me.
That's fine.
Yeah. I got the training because I knew that it was something that I wanted.
Yeah.
I watched my father pass. Cancer is
Mm,
very prevalent in my family, and I wasn't with him when he passed. But I wanted to be, right? And wish I could have been and all of those things. But I watched his slow decline over years. Um, but it taught me that we when we have a knowing that we are going to pass, which it's a blessing and a curse. I think it's you can choose how you want to exit.
mm,
And how many people, not everybody gets that opportunity. I
yeah.
see it as an opportunity,
Yes.
really weird opportunity, but
Totally.
knowing what I know now is I can choose who I want to visit me or who I don't want to come visit me. I can
Mhm,
choose if I want my body washed by my loved ones or
mm,
not. I can
mhm.
choose how I want the environment to be. I can choose where I want to be. I have choice and say, and that's a sense of agency that not everybody gets. And so I think that's the blessing in knowing when it's coming, or not when it's coming, but that it's imminent, right?
Yes.
And I think the hardest part for loved ones and those who are find themselves in that situation is the acceptance that it is coming, that it is
Mhm,
going to happen. There is
mhm.
nothing that you can do about it. And I think we waste a lot of time, precious time, wrapped up in the details, the bills,
Mm,
the mundane communications of day to day life, which need to happen, of course.
yeah.
The logistics and all of that, those conversations need to happen. But how about the deeper conversations, saying what you need to say, um, addressing the communications that have gone undelivered over the years,
Yeah.
all of those things. Anything you want to share on that? What you've learned about end of life through
Mhm.
your personal experience and through working with those in the industry and things like that. What have you have found like been the most like I did not ever realize or think of it this way?
Well, one of my favorite concepts of people who now granted we know like a lot of lives end tragically or abruptly and so we're not talking about that, but we're talking about people who maybe have a terminal illness and they know that death is imminent and there is more choice and agency. And I heard one chaplain call it a welcoming committee. Like people who are dying will see loved ones who have already died and just the stories of like the way that they see it, whether it's like they're in the room or they're like across a river. Um, maybe it's Jesus himself has come to get you. And like I love that concept so much. I remember one time I attended a training, it was like a 2-day intensive training, and I was in the midst of, mostly clinical people. It was clinicians who were either oncologists or hospice nurses, and then there were like social workers, and then there were chaplains. And I was like, I'm a non-clinician. I am not certified in any of these fields. And it was such an amazing training. And so like it was that 2-day training, and I'm surrounded by people who are like doing incredible end of life work, and then watching this webinar from the chaplain who talked about the welcoming committee. And I had this huge aha, and I couldn't wait to come home and tell my husband. And I'm like, John, that's my husband. I was like, I want Gina to be the president of my welcoming committee when I'm going to die. And I was just like beaming. And he's like, are you okay? And I'm like, yes. I'm like, it's going to be amazing. I'm like, because I don't know what her voice sounds like, you
Mm,
know? Like, it's going to be just so special to like hear her call my name and be like, Erin, it's time. Like, I'm ready for you. I've been preparing this little cottage for you. It's right next to my cottage. Like, let's go. Um, so that has been the coolest thing to me when I've been learning from people who do this work or doing my own research in what the final chapter is like. I just think that is so cool.
I had full body chills as you were describing that. So it sounds like truth to my body.
Mm,
Uh, yeah, and I think so many people who are witnessing the dying process, it can be very scary. And I think it's those people that can have the opportunity to bridge that gap of information and knowledge that, they can pass on to family. It's normal and it's natural. And, it's normal and natural to not drink for maybe days. People are trying to force water but it's normal and natural, or they call it picking.
hmm.
And they're trying to like touch the theory. There's a gentleman that was on my podcast, Chris Kerr. He's written a book, Death is But a Dream. He
Mm,
was on the Netflix series, the documentary, what was now it's Surviving Death, actually, is what
mm,
it's called.
okay.
So he was on my podcast, but he talked about that. Like so many people think that people are hallucinating, and that can seem scary. Like, oh, they're seeing people, and that's normal and natural.
Yeah.
Um, it's the welcoming committee,
Right.
and that's what
Right.
they're reaching out to. That is a natural part of the process. And um, yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
It is. I think too, the communication of it, like you said, like you've got to have people who can bridge that gap, and like doing it in a way that's so loving. And so I can see you're going to be
Mm,
so amazing at the bedside, because you have such this calm, soothing way, and you're so intuitive about people's emotions. And so recognizing like most people don't know, right, about these things. Like I'm still learning. Like most people don't know the natural process of dying. And so it's scary if you don't know what's coming and what's happening. And it's doubly scary if it's your loved one, right? And so there's just so much fear there. And so you have to find a way to communicate while taking their emotions into consideration, right? And how do you do that? And how do you lovingly let them know that this is normal? And how do you hold space for their reactions of like, if they're putting it two and two together and they're realizing if this is normal dying, then we're getting closer to death. Like that's a hard that's a hard thing to accept. And so I just know you're going to be so wonderful with the families and with those who are dying, and you'll just be such a hand holder.
Thank you for that. I think one of the things people too don't realize is that you can be in hospice care before you are that close. Like, I think it's a yearly assessment, right? Like, I think it's a year. I don't know. It might be different state to state. Um, but from my understanding is once you can get in, it's like a yearly assessment. Um, but yeah, you can be in hospice care for years.
And there are so many
Years.
benefits. It's
And that
such a
doesn't mean like people equate to hospice as their end of life. They are dying.
right.
But it doesn't have to be, and that's what I hear so often too. Most people end up dying actually in the hospital
Mhm,
with
mhm.
terminal illness
I know,
because they did not realize that hospice care was an option long before
I know.
or didn't
I
accept that that was a possibility.
Right. Yeah, oh, the whole conversation about hospice has to change, right? Because it does have this reputation in the world for people who don't know. There's just a lot of fear and confusion. And then what happens is people delay entering, and then that truth, it becomes truth because then it is just for the last 2 weeks of life. Because people, I think physicians might delay the recommendation because I think from a physician standpoint, you're taught to diagnose and treat and heal. And if you're at the point where you know that you cannot fix this, that's hard to admit. And so I think that, doctors might also need to be making referrals sooner, um, because, and how do they come to terms with this is what's actually best for my patient is for them to be entering hospice. This is the continuum of care. This is not us giving up on them. This is the continuing of care. And there's so many analogies to like birth and death, and it's just part of the process. Like birth is part of the process of your life. Death is part of the process of your life. And I do hope that, there's more grace for everyone involved, for the referring physician, for the family who hears it, for the hospice team who, onboards them, brings them into the world of hospice, that, there's grace and space for all of it to be as long as it needs to be.
I think one of the most difficult things I think in the work that caregivers or people that work in end of life care and things like that, that what we're discussing today is the ability to be honest and transparent. And that's the physicians, it's the caregivers, it's the caretakers, it's those who are dying. It's um I think until we become honest and transparent, then the communication can really flow naturally, I think.
Mm,
But I think as long as people are holding back and they're not saying the truth or speaking the truth, um, I think that can, I don't know. I think that changes how you communicate. I think you
absolutely.
communicate very differently if you're being honest and transparent
Totally.
than if you're in denial or skirting the truth or wanting to people please
Yeah.
or or fear, right? I think a lot of
Oh,
it's
yeah.
fear. It comes down to fear.
Absolutely. And, Brene Brown says clear is kind, right? It's actually a kindness to people to be clear. And I mean, so much of what you're going to be doing, what hospice professionals do, what physicians who are referring their patient to hospice, it's all breaking bad news, right? And there's a process for how to break bad news to someone. It may not seem bad news to this person, but or to the person who's having the conversation because they do it all the time. But for this family, for this person, for this patient, it will forever be etched in their memory. And so there's a way to do it in a loving way that is clear. I've worked with medical students on how to break bad news, and it's really hard for them. They're either too direct, too talkative, giving false hope, not allowing for pauses, space, not allowing for emotions, for emotional responses, or there's this beat around the bush way of doing it that's like, you know, the patient knows they're there for something. Like they deserve to hear the truth, that there's a way to do it that's gentle and clear.
That is a great segue to what are some tips in communication that you would provide um, for those you work with and also for grievers who themselves are trying to communicate what they're feeling, or to those receiving the information in responding? Oh, that's a really mixed bag of questions.
No, I love it. I love it. Because there's communication for every group of
Yes. Yeah.
people you named, right? It's all because anytime it's two or more people where there's communication, whether you like it or not. Like,
I guess that's the first tip, right? Is to
mm,
recognize who your audience is.
mhm.
Yeah. Who are you speaking to?
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of my favorite tips has to do with what I call heart moments and head moments.
Mm,
And a heart moment is anytime someone is expressing an emotion, a feeling. And a head moment is more logic, data, information. Even if the information is good, that's a head moment. And the point is you have to be aware of where the other person is. If someone's in a heart moment, you cannot you cannot
mm.
come in with your own head moment. You have to meet them with their heart first. And to give empathy, and to connect with them. Because and Dr. I think his name is Daniel Siegel. I think I got his name right. He's a pediatrician and he talks about flipping the lid because the brain is like my thumb is the amygdala, and then this is the prefrontal cortex. And so when people are having a strong emotional response, they have literally flipped the lid. And this like decision making logical brain is like temporarily gone. And this like everything's on fire, I'm going to get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger part of your brain is the one that's responding. And so that's not the time to say, like, this is normal. This is a normal process of death. Or studies show that, 82% of people who take the chemo and radiation that we're offering will see success with it. Like, that's not the time for that. Like, if
Mhm.
the lid has been flipped, you need to empathize with them. You need to name their emotion. You need to say, you seem really scared right now. Wow, that was a lot. Tell me what's going on. I noticed a shift. I noticed that you furrowed your brow. Can you tell me what you're thinking? Like those are ways to meet someone in their head moment and then slowly they'll calm down and then you can have talk about the information and stuff. So that's one of my favorite tips for communication is heart moments and head moments and you cannot come in with a head moment if someone else is in a heart moment. You just can't. It's not going to go well. You're going to waste a lot of time.
I love
Um,
that.
right? It's fun.
What's fascinating to me about that is that infants naturally do this.
Right.
Infants naturally mirror back to us.
Yes.
You go like this, and they'll do that. Infants will do that. Or, milk, sign language, milk. They
Yeah.
learn to mirror that.
Yeah.
If you're happy, a baby's gonna, you know,
Yes.
the tone of
Yes.
voice, infants naturally mirror back to us. And I think we just lose that with our mind, right?
Yeah.
They're in their heart all the time,
You know,
I feel like.
so that is so true. That is so true. Yeah. It's those mirror neurons, right? It's
Mhm.
like, it's just so normal. It's how they learn. That's how they
Yeah.
learn empathy. That's how they learn nonverbal communication. That's how they learn emotions, right? And how they learn connection. Yeah, you're right. We end up losing it.
Yeah. So be a baby, be a mirror.
Be a baby. That's what it boils down to. That's what
Be
it
like a
boils.
baby. Yeah.
Be like a baby. You had some other categories of people. Should we
Oh,
talk through
yeah,
that?
sure. Go ahead.
Communication tips.
Yes.
I know you said grievers, right? I think.
Mhm.
Oh, I mean, it's so
That's a
hard.
great one too, though. That's still the same,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think.
You're right. You're right. it's hard because you don't want to put the burden on the grievers and be like, okay, grievers, like this is what you need to do. It's like grievers shouldn't have to do anything. And yet, I think a good tip for grievers is to have just like a couple things in their pocket to pull out when they need it, right? Like if it's something you can't get out of and you know there's going to be a nosy nose person there or a chatty Cathy, like just have a pull out phrase that you can use at any time. I'm going to go get some punch. Like it can literally be that. It can be like a total diversion. It can be a total like I'm not comfortable talking about that right now. Or I'm fine, thank you. Like even if you're not fine, like if it's chatty Cathy McNoser Nosington, then you can just be like, I'm fine, thank you. Like you can just have something to say to a person that you don't feel like opening up to, and that is okay.
Yeah, and
What
I
would you
think that's the
say?
thing. Yeah, I think people, you can't expect, here's the deal. Like, don't even approach the griever. If you have never had a heart to heart with this person, or you
Oh,
have never, you don't even have to say anything elaborate, right? Just unless you actually mean it, I'm here for you. Don't say
mm,
it.
right.
It's people can recognize and sniff BS out. Like
Yeah,
most
yeah,
people, especially a griever, like they're going to hear it over and over and over.
yep,
Don't BS them. I mean, that's what I would say. Like, say what you mean and mean what you say, and say it with compassion.
yeah. I think that's good. I think that's really good. I have a friend, she's a grief coach, and she loves to say, if it's someone you're close to, and it's a griever who's lost someone recently, just very specific, like, I'm bringing dinner tomorrow night. Will you will you be home at 6 so I can leave it on your doorstep? Or like as specific as possible.
Yeah, and even leaving it on the doorstep, it releases the expectation that, okay, I guess I'm gonna have to like put on some clothes
Right,
and brush
exactly.
my hair.
I know, right?
Do I have to see you? I
Right.
mean, I
No,
really don't
don't.
want to see you. So, yeah, if you release that pressure or expectation that I actually have to open the door and have a conversation,
Yeah,
I love that. Like,
right?
because I can see myself like, yeah, just leave it on the door so I don't have to feel obligated to
Right. No,
engage.
no obligation needed. I mean, just like when, standard practice, at least that I've seen, when someone has a baby, right? And you put together the meal plan or the meal drop off thing, food train, like generally speaking, it's not the mom you're like texting with. It's like, you know, we set it all up so that the mom isn't the one who has to do the logistics of the receiving
Mm.
of the food, right? Because they're busy. Like they're busy healing and nursing. That's what they're doing. That's their job. And like hubby can be the one to get the text that says, dinner's on the doorstep or whatever, or maybe mom's in town. Mom can be the one, like give them mom's number, but like don't put the onus on the person who's grieving the most. What's the pour in, dump out, right? Like let's all pour into that person and let's dump out the other way.
I think another key amazing phrase for people to hear who are going through something challenging is, when you're considering doing something, at the end asking, is that okay?
Mm, hmm.
Because it might not be okay with that person.
Right.
And that gives them the autonomy to choose
Yeah.
as well, and the sense of agency to choose.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate it, but not right now. Thank you. It gives
Yeah.
them an opportunity to accept or not accept.
Hmm.
Well, and I think because what can happen in situations like that too, right? Like everybody can pour in all at once. And then 2 weeks later, it's, like, dead silent.
Right. You have like 1,300 bagels from Panera in your house, and then, 1,200 of them go bad, and then there's nothing, and there's crickets.
And so as a griever, I could be like, "You know what? I'm good for now, thank you, but
Yeah.
please ask me again in 3 weeks."
Mhm, mhm.
Right?
Yep,
It's as a griever, then you're communicating what you need.
yeah,
It gives you an opportunity to communicate your needs rather
yeah,
than someone pushing something on you and you feeling guilty to accept, right? Or feeling pressure to accept that might not be what you need at that moment. So I think, is
exactly.
that okay? Is a great question to ask at the end of anything you're proposing to do or, you know, any action you're thinking about taking, I guess.
I love that too. I love that. From a communication standpoint, we talk about open-ended questions versus closed-ended questions.
Hmm.
And generally, like when you want the conversation to flow, like you do an excellent job as a podcast host, right? You're asking open-ended questions, right?
I'm a
Open.
questioner.
What's that?
I'm naturally a questioner. I'm
No,
never
that's
short of questions.
but you're very good at it, right? It comes naturally to you.
Yes.
But open-ended questions cannot be answered with yes or no. They
Mhm.
require some sort of explanation. While closed-ended questions are perfect for this situation, which is why you said, is that okay with you? They can say yes or no. They don't have to come up with a thing, right? Anytime we can relieve the burden of the griever coming up with a thing, then that's better, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So exactly as you said, like I'm planning on, bringing over a banana bread for tomorrow. Is that okay? I can drop it on your doorstep. Is that okay? Yes or no? Versus, I would love to bring you a breakfast. Please tell me what you would like.
Mhm.
Like, that's just like, I don't know what I would like.
Well, and then you're like, again, like, I'm gonna have to engage with this person.
Right.
I might not be hungry tomorrow.
Right.
I really don't eat breakfast. Well, then I'm gonna have to say no. And then they're gonna feel like, well, I tried to do this thing and she said no. And then telling her friends, well, she doesn't want my help. You know what I mean? What that creates? Look at how that can snowball.
Oh,
And
snowball.
yes,
Yeah.
this is why relationships with grievers can fall apart and fade to the background because of miscommunication and not reading the room, right?
Yeah.
Not anticipating the next, like, play that scenario out to the end. Like, and if it were me, would I want 10 people out telling me they're going to bring me breakfast and to tell me what they want? And probably not. So maybe I shouldn't be asking this person the same thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And
this is
there's
why I think it's so excellent what you do because it's
thank
so
you.
needed.
Thank you. Yeah. It is important. It is important because it's also like we're all grievers, right? I mean, whether you've had a significant loss in your life yet or not, you will. And, we're all grieving all sorts of things. It doesn't have to be death. And so, like, we all just have to tap into that. Like you said, like, put yourself in their shoes. If this was me, if my loved one had just died, and would I want to be doing this? Would I want people saying this to me? Would I want them doing this? No, I would not. And like you also have to find there's so many resources out there too, right? Like there's so many wonderful ways to find this information on like how do I communicate with grievers? Like what is a good idea of something to say and not to say? Like LinkedIn has it all. Just search it up.
Mhm.
Um, Probably Instagram and TikTok too. But the information is out there. It's out there. It's just a matter of having the wherewithal to say, gosh, this is going to be a delicate conversation. How do I want to handle it? How do I want to approach this person? And I've made mistakes, and I don't know if you feel this, Victoria, but I feel extra pressure. I mean, it's silly. It's like, oh, poor me. I feel extra pressure to like be a great support person when it's when I know someone. But I do, like, I do feel an extra layer of like, I really gotta nail this. Like, I really gotta, and it's silly. I don't have to do it right. I'm a human being. Making an effort is better than not making an effort, right? Like, trying is better than not trying, as long as you're not a total jerk. Um, Even something like, and I love this. I love the like, I don't know what to say, right? Like, if you're approaching a griever and you don't know what to say, like, say like, I wish I knew what to say right now, you know?
I've said that. I've said there are no words.
Yeah,
Wrapping you in the biggest hug.
right.
Yeah.
Cause like, I mean, we can't like empathy can only go so far. Like, you can only put yourself in someone's shoes so far. Like, we can't really know what it's like because everyone's relationship is complicated and different and complex. And, we don't know. We don't know. And, like we're both moms. Like, I can't imagine if something happened to my child, right? Like, I can't imagine that. And like, I can try and imagine, but I can't really know what it's like unless it happened to me. And so, that's another one of those, yeah, like there are no words. Like, I don't know what to say.
That's one of the things I've actually heard grievers say is people say all the time, I can't imagine. You know what? I want you to imagine. I
Mm,
want you to imagine. I want you to know what this feels like. I want you to know what this pain feels like so that you know what it feels like.
mm.
I have heard grievers say that.
Thank you for that.
It's sometimes people really do want you to know what it feels like because you can't understand it until you feel it. And it's not wishing it on other
No,
people, but
no.
that's why it's so can feel so isolating. That's why grief can feel so
Yes.
isolating.
Yeah. It's like I'm going back to Brene Brown. I don't know if you've seen the video of empathy with her. And it's like this like creature in a hole. It's like the
Mm.
person up here, like, hey, how's it going down there? It's like none of that really helps until this creature comes down, like, and sits with that other person, like in the hole. Like, that's empathy, is to like go and like sit with them in the yuck.
One of
Um,
the things I say is people can't sit with, we can only sit with others to the extent that we've sat with ourselves.
mm, that's deep.
That's, I mean,
That's
that
true.
was something I, in my hindsight and reflection, have figured out for myself. Like, because the me before the work that I've personally done on myself and the information and knowledge and tools that I've gained, the me before my grief awareness, really, um, did not have the capacity to do that. And but I thought I did, right? I thought I could, like I was the one that everybody came to, people I knew came to, and they needed a shoulder to lean on. I was spreading myself thin. I was a people pleaser. I thought I could save the world. And
Mhm,
when I couldn't, it was a reflection of me and my worth and I turned it on myself, like I'm a victim. Or when circumstances would happen to me, it would be like I was a victim. I couldn't see the forest through the trees, right? I could not recognize, I didn't have the hope, I didn't have the tools and the knowledge and the awareness to see beyond where I was at the moment. But you work through that and you clean up that and you do the work of looking at the past, really, because people don't want to, but it's very important for our healing to connect the dots for ourselves. This is why in interviews like this one, I we rewind the clock. We look at the past, like how was grief talked about when you were growing up? It's influencing how you look at grief today,
mhm,
and how the behaviors that you use to cope with grief. How did you cope as a child? How are you coping now? What connections are there? Because there are
yeah,
connections.
yeah,
Um, I could go on my soapbox all the live long day on this, but this is why I feel like, yes, our parents do what they can with what they know at the time. But
mhm,
this is why I get on my soapbox with parents today or caregivers or just individuals who are grievers today is that the work that you do on yourself has a ripple effect. This
Mhm.
is how we change society is on a collective is as individuals we sweep our own doorstep.
Yeah, I could not agree more.
But I want to know if there is any other tips that you have that are they I've loved this conversation. We've talked about stuff on this podcast today that I don't think I've ever had a conversation about certain aspects with anybody else. So this has been I've enjoyed this very much. So if there's anything else you would like to share on tips or anything like that that you don't feel you got to, please share.
Any other tips, or things I didn't get to? I think what I wanna say is what you just said, like, awareness is the first step. It's the first step in so many things, right? It's the first step in grief, really, to be aware about, whether it's how I'm feeling physically in my body, like, what is the sensation that's happening right now? Is that grief? What is happening, right? Like, am I hunched? Am I tight? Am I sore? Am I sick to my stomach? Like, what is happening? Awareness is key. And then awareness for communication, right? Like, we have to be aware of how we are, how we come across, which is not easy. That's why I'm a professional role player, and then I bring professional role players with me so that how often do we get to practice having these hard conversations and get the feedback, get the insight from the person that you're talking to? Never, right? Not unless after we hit record, after you stop recording, Victoria, you and I, like, okay, when I said this, I felt as though I was, you know, um, interrupting you a lot. Did you notice that? And how did I come across on that piece when we were talking about XYZ, right? Like, unless we literally did that, you don't get that opportunity. And so being aware, whether it's asking a dear, close, honest friend how you come across, or getting some practice in a safe space where you can get that insight. I I worked at an assisted living home. I worked with the residents who had dementia years ago, and it was a hard job because people who have dementia, like they run on their own everything. Like, it's just they do whatever they want whenever they want, and they're a hoot. And I loved them, and it was a hard job, and I ran their activities, so it was like
Wow.
it was so fun, and it was so hard. I would come in every morning and there was no like office, right? You're just like in this like walk through space that I shared with my boss. And I would just put my stuff down and I would just like start going. And then one day, my boss said to me, "You never say good morning." And I was shocked and I was like crushed. I was like, oh my gosh. I was just like trying to take this job. Like, I didn't say this out loud, but internalizing everything. I was like, I'm just trying to take this job so seriously and just like get to work right away. And like, who needs this? Who needs that? Like, I'm here. I'm ready to go. Right. But it shaped me because I was like, I was a horrible communicator back then. I wasn't
Coming
even
in hot.
saying good morning. Right. I was coming in hot. I had no awareness. And so even for someone who does this for a living, I still need people to tell me, okay, your tone was a little condescending there. Or you know what? You didn't you tried to empathize with me, but it came across like a robot because that's what you do for a living. Like I still need people to tell me that kind of stuff. So I think just awareness and find a trusted, honest friend or come work with me because, we can help you. We can gently offer you insight on how you're coming across and how you can change. It's all changeable. It's
This
all
would be like workshops for parents, workshops for teens who feel like, what teen doesn't feel like they're heard sometimes? I'm sure even my own kids, right? Like,
Yeah.
I, yeah, this could be the communication is, what do they say? Expectations are planned disappointments. And I think a lot
Ooh,
of expectations can be nipped in the bud or curbed with our communication.
totally.
Um, Even text, as you were talking, and I actually worked in a nursing home too, and there we had a dementia ward too. But even with text messages, like you sharing that story made me think of how I've become consciously aware of when I'm texting people, not just going right into the question or the statement or whatever. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, like the salutation, right?
Right.
We do that in emails. Hello.
Yeah,
Why does it not come natural when we're, meet somebody or see somebody and or like that's I think where the texting is really we can really come off and be interpreted not with how we intend, right?
exactly.
I think we have to be
Exactly.
extra even more thoughtful in our texting.
Oh,
uh,
yeah.
because there aren't those verbal cues, there aren't those
Right.
physical cues, right?
Right. But there's emojis. So,
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and this brings up a good question, like giving bad news over text. This is something I've heard more and more about, like people hearing about someone who died in the family through text or
oh,
Facebook message,
oh.
or it's like, what do you have to say to that?
I just say that's not best practice.
Yeah, don't do that.
Like, that's, you know, I mean, my parents, when Gina died, because I was living far away from my family of origin at the time when she died, and my mom sent me a text that said, "Can you please call home?" And I was at work, right? So I stepped out and I called home, right? Which I made sense to me. If she had called me and I'm in the middle of like, you know, text, "Can you please call home?" Which I knew as soon as I saw it, I was like, okay, like it's time. Um, but yeah, no, let's not deliver bad news over text or email or Facebook message. Let's just not do that. Let's not do that.
It's
Let's
a
not do
great
that. I
point
mean,
on
even
email.
even some, medical professionals have to, I've heard them breaking bad news over, the patient portal or whatever. And it's like,
Oh,
oh, like let's not do that. Let's not do that. Or even
well,
a phone call is not.
mhm,
Ah. I mean, a phone call
cringy.
for a medical professional, like if you can come in and deliver that news in person, right? But like clearly, if someone has died and you need to communicate that, and they're not, you need to pick up the phone and call them, right?
That's a great point too with the portal thing because I think so many, I mean, people who have been diagnosed with terminal illness and stuff, I mean, especially in the last 5 years or so, the patient portal, it even says like you might see something in this that you might read something before your doctor even has an opportunity to share with you. Like it's almost you have to acknowledge that that's a
Yeah.
possibility. And
Yes.
but I think our
Yes.
curiosity gets the best of us, and it's like, "Ooh, I wanna know," but it's like, "Do you really wanna know this way?"
I know.
Right?
I know.
Yeah.
Oof. It's, I mean, with all the tech, right? Now are these extra challenges of like, okay, how do we do this compassionately? How do we communicate on this using this modality compassionately? It can be done, but I agree, there are certain things, let's not send a text to say someone died.
Yeah, and even how do you do that company-wide too? Like in company
Yeah.
organizations and things
Yeah.
like that.
It's tricky. And of course, there's going to be mistakes. Like, I think that if we allow ourselves the grace to like really do our best, like we all need to educate ourselves is first and foremost, right? We all need to be aware, educate ourselves, but know that like something is better than nothing, for the most part, unless you're a total jerk. Um, but like an attempt is usually better than a non-attempt because I think that the isolation that can happen and the gaslighting that can happen and the like, wait, we can't talk about this. Like that's the message that's happening if it's just not addressed.
And that's, I think, with companies, within companies and organizations, I think that's the mental health aspect of being human. Um, I think that's definitely shifting and becoming more of a conversation. But it's something really that people, organizations and companies just didn't even touch before. And I think
Right.
COVID kind of helped propel that. But mental health, like even I have a day job, and even in my own company that I work with, they had a breakout, a session on mental health, and had a certified or trained first aid, mental health first aid person come in, which I'm also trained in that as well. But I think the more, like anything, right, the more you talk it out, the more you communicate, it's going to be better than not at all. And you can learn from it that way, as long as
Yeah.
you're learning from it.
Yes.
Do better
Yes.
next time. You can do it, but you can always do better next time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So what would you say, one of the questions I often ask people is, how would you describe yourself before the loss versus after? But because this has been an experience for you that has been all your life,
Mhm.
I'll just ask, what has your grief taught you?
So many things. So many things. I've actually used that exact prompt before, for a program I do where we have people share and then a musician plays some music for them based on what they shared. What has my grief taught me? So many things. What is present for me right now? Um, what's that quote? Tread lightly, everyone's carrying a heavy burden, right? Like I think it's really that. I think it's that like we're all navigating some kind of loss. And I think the more I can do to heal and to learn and to grow, the more I can be of service to others and to just tread lightly. Like everyone is grieving something or someone. And they might not even know it. They might not even know. I had no idea I was grieving my sister before she died, you know, that I was. And so I think it's just about, like I had my own, like in the spring of 2020, summer of 2020, my own like racial awareness, like ahas, right? Um, and I remember the quote, racism, like once you start seeing it, it's like dust, in the sunlight. It's everywhere. Like you can't unsee it. And I feel that way about grief too. It's like you can't unsee once you start diving in that, like, oh my gosh, like, of course they're grieving their divorce. Of course they're grieving their child went off to college. Of course they're grieving that diagnosis. Like now I can't help but see it everywhere. And so it's helped me to hopefully be gentler and more compassionate with other people and give them more grace.
I love that. Is there anything else that you would like to share?
Thank you for having me. This was really fun.
It was fun. I mean, we're talking about grief. Grief isn't
What
usually fun, right?
what
But
could be what could be funner than grief?
an end
Not
of life,
fun.
right? Yeah. I'd say jokingly, I'll say to people, grief is my jam. It's like, that's weird.
Oh, totally. Like I get it.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'm a weirdo then. Call me a weirdo.
Well,
I'll let my
then you're in
weirdo
good
flag
company. I'm
fly.
a weirdo too
Yes.
then.
We'll let our weirdo flags fly. Where can people reach you if they're in the end of life? industry, want to learn more about communication, the work that you're doing, how can people find you? When does your book release? All of the things.
Mm, all the things. So I am at compassionatecoaching.org. That's my site. And you can either contact me through the site or you can send me an email. I love getting emails from people. It's Erin at compassionatecoaching.org. My book, right now we're recording in early December of 2024. My book is in the hands of an editor. So I'm thinking early 2025, hopefully it'll
Okay.
be it'll be published, and I'll let you know so that you can update your show notes once it's available. But I do have a where you can enter your email to get on the wait list so that you can be updated. So I'll give you that link too so people can get on the wait list if they want to find out about the book.
Perfect. And is that based on your personal experience, or is it more of like is it
Oh,
more
it's
memoir or self-help or kind of a blend?
kind of like a micro-y memoir, mini memoir, of my experience with anticipatory grief for 40 years. And then now that Gina has died, she passed away in 2016. So, like, what it's like to live now that she's died.
And what do you think is coming next for you? What do you look forward to?
I look forward to so many things. We didn't get a chance to talk about it on this podcast, but I do a really cool modality called playback theater related to grief. And I'm really excited to be doing some more of that locally. I'm in Arlington, Virginia. So if anyone's near the Arlington, Virginia area, the DMV, they can look me up. And I will be doing, I noticed you're part of Inelda, and I will be doing a webinar for them in April on communication skills, bringing two of my role players. So,
And that is the organization I was talking about. That wasn't really, communication really wasn't a huge focus of the
yeah,
training. So
yeah.
that's excellent. That's great.
I'm so excited. Then hopefully I'll see you there.
Yes.
Great.
Thank you so much. I've loved this conversation. It's been a huge I really, really loved the tips portion because I think there was things talked about that just um I'm glad that came through in our
Mm,
conversation. So I'm
me
really
too.
thankful for your time today. And I hope that this is of service to everyone who listens to it and that they share it with people that they know who may um, need some tips, right? Because I loved it. I loved it all. Thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thank you so much for having me, Victoria.
And remember, when you unleash your heart, you unleash your life. Much love.